No one on the patrol expected anything unusual that morning. The sun was still low, the air cold enough to sting their lungs, and the ground felt dead under their boots. Sergeant Miller walked at the front of the squad, steady as always, eyes scanning the tree line like he had done 1,000 times before. But even he felt something off in the air. It was quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. The kind of quiet that made the hair on the back of your neck lift. They reached the old ridge where command had picked up strange radio echoes. Most of the time these signals were nothing. Broken wires. Old enemy equipment still humming. Birds. Wind. But this one was different. It repeated every few hours, like someone was trying to speak but didn't know how. The entrance to the bunker sat half buried in dirt and dead branches. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Rust covered the steel door. Ivy wrapped around the top like nature was trying to seal it shut. Two of the younger soldiers joked that the place looked haunted. Miller didn't laugh. He only stared at the frame and felt something cold move through him, something old and familiar. One of the guys brushed away the loose dirt and muttered that nothing could be alive in there. But Miller stepped closer and knelt. The dirt around the door was disturbed. Lightly. Recently. Not by an animal. These marks were too even, too shaped. His stomach tightened. He told the squad to check their corners and stay close. His voice was calm, but inside, he felt a quiet alarm he couldn't explain. The last time he had felt this kind of warning in his gut, things had gone very wrong. When the door creaked open, the sound echoed down the tunnel like a long cry. Dust floated into the air. The smell was a mix of cold earth and metal. The flashlight beams cut through the darkness, hitting old crates and broken wires. Nothing unusual at first. Just another forgotten bunker left behind by an old war. But then Private Lawson stopped walking. He pointed his light at the floor and whispered something that made everyone freeze. There were footprints in the dust. Fresh ones. They were clear enough to show tread patterns. Some deep, some lighter. They headed inside, going deeper into the darkness. Miller stared at them for a long moment. The prints were not old. They had been made within hours. But no one had passed them on the way. No one had been seen in the area. No tracks outside the bunker. No signs of escape. Just footprints leading inward, and none leading out. Lawson whispered that someone had to still be inside. Someone breathing the same air as them. Someone listening right now. Miller didn't answer. He just felt that cold weight settle deeper into his chest. He had seen strange things in war. But nothing like this. They moved in slowly. Every step felt like it could wake something sleeping. Every drip of water sounded like a whisper. The deeper they went, the stronger the feeling grew that they were not alone. But the bunker felt empty. Too empty. The kind of empty that felt wrong. A few yards in, Miller noticed something that made him stop. The prints were uneven, like someone was limping. One foot dragged slightly. He had seen that pattern before, years ago, on a different mission, in a different bunker. A memory he had forced himself to bury pushed its way back into his mind. A teammate. A disappearance. A night he never talked about. He shook it off and kept moving. But his heart wasn't steady anymore. When they reached the first chamber, Lawson cursed softly. On a small metal table sat a half-eaten ration bar. Still soft. Not old. Not dusty. Someone had taken a bite recently. A metal mug stood beside it, and when Miller touched it, he felt warmth. Someone had been here minutes ago. And now they were gone. Private Reed whispered that they should pull back. Something felt wrong. Miller wanted to agree, but something in him refused. The footprints. The limp. The strange signal. The old memory trying to force its way back into the front of his mind. He needed to know who had been here. And why they had vanished the moment the patrol arrived. He walked deeper into the bunker, following the footprints that shouldn't exist. Every step made the air colder. Every step made the silence heavier. But when he turned the next corner, he stopped dead. There, in the dust, were new prints layered over the old ones. They were smaller. and they were facing back toward him, as if someone had stood there, watching, waiting, and then stepped backward into the dark. Miller's breath caught. His heart pounded. Whoever was in this bunker knew they were coming. Whoever was in here had watched them enter. And now they were hiding somewhere inside, close enough to hear every step. Close enough to reach out and touch them if they wanted. Miller raised his hand, signaling the squad to freeze, but his voice stayed silent. Something inside him whispered a warning he couldn't ignore. He had walked into a bunker like this once before. And the man who was with him then had never walked back out. Miller kept his hand raised until every soldier stopped breathing loud enough to hear it. The bunker walls seemed to narrow around them. The air felt heavier, like the space itself knew something they didn't. He crouched, studying the new footprints. The size. The direction. The depth. Whoever made them wasn't rushing. They were moving with purpose. With awareness. Someone who understood the bunker better than anyone in the squad. Reed whispered that maybe they were dealing with civilians, but Miller shook his head. Civilians didn't leave footprints like these. Too controlled. Too measured. Too knowing. Whoever had moved through this bunker understood how to step quietly, even on loose dust. They followed the trail deeper, their flashlights shaking slightly in their hands. The walls were etched with old markings, notes, arrows, and strange codes left by soldiers long gone. Miller traced his fingers along one of the symbols. It matched the markings found in a bunker decades ago, the same place where his teammate disappeared. A thought pressed against him, but he refused to let it take over. This was just another mission. Another abandoned structure. Nothing more. But the prints told a different story. In the next chamber, the dust on the floor was disturbed in wide arcs, like someone had moved something heavy. Reed pointed at a wooden crate that had been dragged across the room. The scrape marks were fresh. Miller walked around the crate, half expecting someone to jump out, but it was empty. Completely empty, except for the faint smell of old metal and sweat. Then Lawson saw something on the far wall. A set of numbers scratched into the concrete. Fresh marks. Miller knelt to look closer. The numbers matched a radio frequency used years ago during a failed rescue mission. A mission he was part of. A mission where a man named Corporal James Dorn vanished without a trace. Miller didn't speak. He couldn't. His throat tightened, memories jumping at him like shadows in the corner of his vision. Dorn had walked into a bunker exactly like this one. Injured. Limping. Leaving prints like the ones they were following now. But that was impossible. Dorn was listed as dead. Lost. Gone. He forced himself to breathe and motioned the squad onward. They entered a narrow hallway where the ceiling pressed low, and the air turned cold enough to burn. The footprints continued in a straight line, calm and steady. Then, suddenly, they stopped. Not faded. Not covered. Stopped. Lawson blinked in confusion. Footprints don't just end. Someone has to jump, climb, or turn. But the dust around the final print was untouched. No smudges. No marks. No sign of where the person went. It was as if they had vanished right there, in the air. Reed stepped back, muttering that they needed to leave. Something wasn't right. Something was wrong enough to feel alive. Before Miller could respond, their radios hissed with static. Not normal static. This was rhythmic. Pulsing. Like someone breathing through the speakers. Then a voice crackled through. Soft. Broken. Almost a whisper. Turn around. Every soldier froze. Miller's stomach dropped. He tightened his grip on his rifle and motioned the others not to move. The voice repeated, weaker this time. Turn around. But Miller didn't turn. Not yet. He listened to the tone. The cadence. The breathe behind the words. There was something familiar about it. Something he had heard years ago. Lawson asked who the voice belonged to, but Miller didn't answer. Then the breathing on the radio grew louder, like the speaker was right beside the microphone. Reed flinched. Lawson's flashlight shook. Suddenly the static cut off. Silence swallowed everything. And that silence felt wrong. Too clean. Too perfect. Miller slowly raised his eyes to the end of the hallway. For a moment he thought he saw something. A shape. A figure. Standing still. Watching them. But when he blinked, the shape dissolved into the dark. Reed whispered that they should turn around like the voice said. Miller finally spoke. His voice low. Controlled. No one turns around until I say so. He walked forward to the final footprint and knelt. He placed his hand next to it. Same size. Same depth. Same pattern. A military boot. Old model. One that hadn't been used in years. His chest tightened. Dorn wore boots like this. He stood up slowly and looked into the darkness ahead, even though he knew nothing was visible. He didn't want the squad to see the doubt in his eyes. He was their anchor. Their calm. Their steady ground. But inside him, something was unraveling. A man who disappeared in a bunker decades ago. A limp in the prints. A radio frequency only Dorn used. A voice that sounded like a whisper from the past. He turned to the squad and told them to stay close. No talking. No wandering. No sudden moves. Because whatever was inside this bunker wasn't running from them. It was leading them somewhere. And Miller had a sinking feeling he knew exactly where. The squad moved in tight formation as Miller led them farther into the bunker. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the ground itself wanted to hold them in place. The temperature kept dropping, and their breaths showed in faint white clouds. Reed whispered that it felt like winter underground, but Miller ignored him and kept walking. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, wide enough for several people to stand comfortably. Dust swirled in the beam of their flashlights. Old metal bunks lined the walls. Some were collapsed and others stood crooked, as if someone had sat on them recently. The thin blankets hanging from the frames looked untouched for decades, and yet one of them had a faint fold, as if a hand had brushed across it. Lawson found a tin cup on the floor. It wasn't dusty. It wasn't rusted. It was clean. Reed picked it up with 2 fingers, staring at it like it didn't belong. Miller studied the small scrape marks on its rim. Someone had used it. Not years ago. Not months ago. Days. Maybe even hours. Reed wanted to call command, but the radios were dead again. Only soft static filled their earpieces. Miller turned his off. Static was worse than silence. He didn't want to hear anything that might sound like breathing again. They moved to the far wall, where a small metal door stood slightly open, leaving a thin line of darkness behind it. Lawson suggested they leave the bunker and report the findings. But Miller told them the truth. If someone was down here, possibly hurt or trapped, the squad couldn't leave. That was their duty. And Miller couldn't walk away, not with the signs pointing to someone he once knew. He pushed the metal door open. The hinges screamed, echoing through the chamber. Behind it was a short hallway ending in a circular room. Strange symbols covered the walls. Some were scratched by hand, others painted in faded red. Reed said it looked like someone had been trying to send a message. Lawson said it looked more like a warning. Miller stepped inside first. The air felt colder here than anywhere else, but somehow it also felt alive, like something was moving just out of reach. He lifted his flashlight toward the far corner. There, on the floor, he saw a folded piece of paper. He picked it up. The edges were crisp. Too crisp. Fresh. His heart thudded as he opened it. The handwriting was messy but familiar. A short note. A name. A date. And one line that made his breath catch. "I am not alone." Lawson asked whose handwriting it was, but Miller didn't answer right away. He couldn't. The letters matched Dorn's writing exactly. He had seen it 100 times on old mission logs and maps. The way the letters curved. The way he pressed too hard into the paper. It was unmistakable. Reed asked if it was possible someone was copying it. Miller shook his head. No one copied handwriting down to the pressure and rhythm of each stroke. This was real. And that made everything worse. Suddenly, A loud metallic clang echoed from somewhere beyond the chamber. The sound was sharp, violent, like someone had slammed a metal locker or kicked a steel door. Reed jumped. Lawson took a step back. Miller lowered his flashlight and raised his weapon, eyes fixed on the dark hallway that split off to the left. No footsteps followed. No breathing. No voice. Just the slow settling of dust falling from the ceiling. Reed whispered that maybe the noise came from a collapsing beam, but Miller knew better. That sound didn't belong to old metal falling. It belonged to something hitting with intention. Something alive. They crossed into the side hallway. The walls were close and the ceiling low. Their boots scuffed through the dust. Then Reed stopped abruptly and pointed ahead. Miller lifted his light. Fresh footprints. Not the old ones from before. New ones. Even fresher. A full trail of them. Heading deeper into the dark. Lawson swallowed and whispered that someone was moving ahead of them right now. Miller nodded. The prints still held their shape too well. No settling. No dust drift. Whoever made them was minutes ahead. Maybe less. Reed asked how someone could move so fast without making a sound. Miller didn't answer. He didn't want to answer. Because the thought forming in his mind didn't make sense. It shouldn't have been possible. Not after all these years. But the signs were pointing toward one impossible truth. A truth he wasn't ready to accept. They followed the footprints until the hallway curved left. As they turned the corner, Miller froze so abruptly that Reed crashed into his back. Lawson's flashlight jerked. Ahead of them, at the end of the hall, stood an old steel door. And on that door, written in the same messy handwriting from the note, were 3 words. "Miller, don't enter." Reed asked how someone could know Miller was coming. Miller didn't answer. Something deep inside him felt like it was twisting tight. Because the handwriting wasn't just familiar. It was his friend's. It was Dorn's. And Dorn had been dead for 15 years. The morning felt heavier than the night we had just survived. The bunker seemed to breathe on its own, each metal panel expanding and contracting like a patient heartbeat buried under dirt. We gathered at the table with a map spread wide, though none of us could focus on the lines and markers. Everyone kept glancing toward the hallway where the fresh footprints had appeared, as if expecting another set to form while we watched. Soto broke the silence first. He said he could still hear the faint metal tapping he'd heard hours earlier, and even though he'd convinced himself it was wind, he now admitted it didn't sound like wind at all. No one laughed. No one even pretended. It wasn't the time for bravado. I reminded the team that the tracks had appeared after we'd searched the entire complex, all rooms cleared, all corners checked. And they weren't old prints softened by time. They were crisp. Pressed by someone moving slow, steady, deliberate. Someone with a reason to walk around unseen. Chang asked the question we were all trying to avoid. If the bunker was sealed from the outside, and if no one had entered or left, then where did the person go? None of us had an answer. The air felt colder, as if the bunker itself resented the question. We retraced the prints again, this time with absolute focus. They started near the entrance hall we had swept the night before, traveled 10 paces down the main corridor, then simply stopped. No turnoff. No side room. Just vanished mid-stride. Chom whispered that maybe the person stepped backward into their own prints, but that didn't explain the final print, the one that was deeper, pressed harder, like a step followed by a sudden lift. Almost as if the person was pulled upward. Soto followed the overhead ventilation shaft with his flashlight and found nothing but dust. But the moment he touched the metal, we all heard it, a faint creak coming from deep inside the shaft, far beyond where we could see. It didn't sound like an echo. It sounded like something shifting its weight. We debated splitting up. Lopez shut that down quickly. He said you don't split up in a place that makes its own sounds. He was right. So we moved together, slowly, following the corridor that branched off toward the storage wing. That was where we first felt the temperature drop. It wasn't subtle. It hit like we'd walked into a freezer, the kind of cold that bites your teeth when you breathe. The deeper we went, the more the bunker changed. paint peeled in strips like shedding skin. Bolts rusted in place. A door squealed open with almost no effort, even though rust covered every hinge. Nothing made sense. The prince hadn't led here, but something else had. We found the old generator room next. The machinery sat in silence, dead for decades. But someone had wiped the dust from a portion of the control panel. One clean streak. A single human finger dragged across metal that should have been untouched for years. Chang stepped back, gripping his rifle tighter. Lopez muttered that maybe someone from a previous unit explored here, but the dust layer didn't lie. This was recent. Soto suggested that maybe we weren't dealing with a person at all. Maybe it was an animal. But no animal makes footprints shaped like a human boot with perfect tread patterns. And no animal wipes dust from a control panel. The radio in the corner crackled suddenly, even though it wasn't connected to power. A burst of static. A faint pulse. Then nothing. We stood without breathing, eyes locked on the dead machine. The echo of the static hung in the room long after it faded. We decided to leave the generator bay and clear the lower levels. The stairs moaned under our weight. Halfway down, we found more prints. Fresh ones. But these were different. Smaller. Barefoot. The prints were scattered, almost erratic, like someone had run through the corridor in panic. They led directly into the door of the old communications room. The door was shut tight. Lopez put his ear against it. His eyes widened. He swore he heard breathing on the other side. Soft. Controlled. Waiting. We pointed our weapons and prepared to enter. The moment Chang turned the handle, the breathing stopped. Inside, the room was empty. Only the static of a broken console buzzing faintly. But something else was there, something we couldn't deny. The smell. Warm. Human. Recent. Whoever had been in that room couldn't have been gone for more than seconds. Soto ran his light across the wall and found a message scratched into the metal surface. The letters were crooked, uneven, as if carved in desperation. Don't follow the footprints. We backed away without speaking. Every instinct told us to leave. But orders kept us rooted. That message changed everything. Someone was inside with us, aware of us, watching us. And they wanted us to turn around. But we weren't turning around. Not yet. Not after what we saw next. At the end of the hallway, beyond the dim lights, a door slowly swung open on its own. No wind. No movement. Nothing to push it. Just a silent invitation. And those same barefoot prints appeared again. Fresh. Forming one at a time. As if someone invisible was walking right toward us. We didn't move at first. It felt wrong to even breathe. The prints appeared one after another, each one forming with a soft, sinking sound, like pressure on old dust. They stopped about 6 feet from us, perfectly spaced, perfectly human, perfectly impossible. Lopez whispered for us to hold position, but even his voice sounded like it didn't belong in that corridor anymore. Chang lifted his light and swept it through the empty air. Nothing. No movement. But the dust kept shifting in tiny swirls around the last print, as though something stood there, breathing the same air we did. I stepped back, not because of fear, but because instinct screamed at me that whatever stood there wasn't trying to hide. It was trying to show itself. But only as much as it wanted to. The air felt different around us. Thicker. Heavier. I could hear my own pulse pounding, matching the tense silence of the bunker. Then came the sound. A whisper, but not words. More like a distant exhale moving down the hallway. Not from ahead. From behind us. We turned as one unit. Lights. Rifles. Stances. Nothing stood there. The corridor behind us remained empty and undisturbed, the dust untouched. But something had breathed out. Something that didn't care if we heard it. Lopez made the call that we pushed deeper. Not out of bravery. Out of logic. Whatever we were dealing with wasn't afraid of us. And retreating blindly through the same narrow passages could corner us. Better to move with purpose. We followed the barefoot prints through the open door, entering a corridor none of us remembered from the map. It was longer, narrower, lined with old metal cabinets and rotting papers stuck to the floor. The prince led straight ahead, then abruptly veered into another room. This one had a heavy, half-broken glass door leaning to the side, as if someone tried to close it years ago but gave up halfway. Inside, old bunk beds lined the walls. Sheets hung in stiff, frozen folds. Dust rose with every step. But what caught our attention first was the pattern on the floor. More footprints. Bare. Overlapping. As if multiple people had rushed around decades ago and had never left. Yet only one set looked fresh. Chang knelt near the center and touched one of the older prints. The dust crumbled like ash. Then he compared it to the new ones. Those had sharper edges, grain pressed deeper. Someone had walked here within hours. Soto pointed his light to the far bunk. Something small rested on it. A folded piece of paper. Too clean to belong in a place like this. Lopez opened it carefully. 6 words, written in shaky handwriting. Stop looking for what's gone. The message in the communications room had warned us not to follow footprints. Now this one warned us not to search for something lost long ago. The bunker felt like it was trying to tell a story, one piece at a time, but never fully. A puzzle missing its heart. We kept moving, clearing rooms one by one. Some were empty. Others held remnants of old lives abandoned in a hurry. Mugs turned to powder, jackets eaten by dampness, notebooks stuck together by time. But every so often, we found another sign. A chair recently moved. Dust wiped away. A shadow shifting where it shouldn't. Then we reached the laboratory. The smell hit first. Metal. Cold. A sharp hint of chemicals long evaporated but somehow lingering. The room had a large table in the center with broken glass scattered across it. But behind the table stood something that made us stop. The wall had long claw marks etched deep into the concrete. Not from an animal. From hands. Human hands dragged downward, grooves dug in with desperate force. Soto swore under his breath. The marks were old, but next to them, newer lines intersected, thin scratches, almost as if someone had traced over the old trauma in quiet reflection. We walked deeper into the lab, and that's when we noticed the door at the back. It wasn't on the original layout. A reinforced door with a small, fogged window at eye level. Someone had wiped the glass recently, leaving a smeared handprint on it. Small. Smaller than any of ours. Lopez signaled for silence, and we approached as one unit. I leaned close to the window and tried to see inside. Darkness. Something faint moved in the back, or maybe it was the reflection of our lights. Chang pressed his ear against the metal and froze. He said he heard tapping. Slow. Rhythmic. Like someone patiently knocking from the other side. We stepped back as the rhythm changed. The taps became faster. Sharper. Closer. As if whoever was inside the room had rushed toward the door. Then everything stopped. Every sound. Every vibration. For a moment, the bunker seemed to hold its breath with us. Then, from behind the door, a single fingertip pressed against the glass. Just the shape of it. A dark shadow. Motionless. We raised our rifles, not out of fear, but out of sheer disbelief. The fingers slowly slid down, leaving a faint streak in the condensation. Whoever stood behind that window knew we were here. Knew how to reach us without words. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. Lopez reached for the latch, but before he touched it, the lights in the entire bunker flickered. Once. Twice. Then everything went dark. Total black. The kind that made sound louder and breath tighter. In that pitch-black quiet, something walked across the floor in front of us. Not barefoot. Not booted. Something else entirely. A drag. A slow slide. A step that didn't match anything human. And it was heading straight toward us. The darkness felt alive. Every sound sharpened. Every breath echoed. And that dragging step kept moving toward us, slow and deliberate, as if whatever made it didn't need to rush. Lopez whispered for us to stay still, but none of us needed the order. Every instinct screamed that movement would give us away, even though something unseen had already found us. A faint hum rolled through the walls, like old generators struggling to wake up. But the lights didn't return. We stood in absolute black, rifles raised at nothing we could see. The dragging sound stopped only a few feet from us. I could feel it, pressure, presence, something neither warm nor cold, something that made the hair on my arms rise even beneath my gear. Then came breathing. Slow, heavy, right in front of us. Too close. Chan clicked on his flashlight, a reflex of panic rather than control. The beam cut through the darkness. Nothing stood there. No figure. No body. But the dragging marks on the floor appeared fresh, lines carved into dust that hadn't settled yet. Lopez grabbed Chang's wrist and forced the light downward. The prints we saw weren't footprints. They looked like the motion of fingers curling and uncurling, dragging along the concrete. Not deep enough to be scratches, but clear enough to show someone, or something, had crawled. The bunker lights flickered again, then returned in a weak, trembling glow. The corridor looked different now. Dust in the air swirled as if stirred by movement. The door with the fogged window was still shut, but the condensation had vanished completely, wiped clean from the inside. Then the tapping came back. Not from behind the door this time. It came from above. Each tap echoed through the ceiling, moving slowly across the length of the room. We aimed up, but the metal plates hid everything. Something crawled across them, careful and deliberate, like it had lived in these tunnels long enough to know every inch by touch. Soto whispered that we needed to fall back to the main corridor. Lopez agreed. We moved fast but controlled, scanning every angle. The moment we crossed into the hallway, the door behind us slammed shut with a metallic crack that shook the walls. No one had touched it. Along the far wall, the fresh, bare footprints reappeared. Not walking away from us this time. Walking parallel. Keeping pace. Almost guiding us. Almost hurting us. Each print formed slowly in the dust as if an invisible presence stepped forward, then paused, waiting for us to follow. It felt like a trap and an invitation at the same time. We followed because the alternative was standing in open silence with whatever crawled above our heads. The prints led us to another part of the bunker, an area marked on the old map as storage, but had been sealed off decades ago. The metal door had rusted completely, but someone had forced it open recently. The scrape marks were fresh, metal against metal. Inside the storage room, crates lined the walls. Most were empty. Some held relics from old military experiments, broken sensors, rusted instruments, scraps of handwritten labels that had faded into nothing. But one crate at the center of the room was different. It sat open, with dust brushed aside on the floor around it. Inside were stacks of files in surprisingly good condition. Lopez pulled one stack out. The papers inside had a red stamp across the front. Project Listener. None of us recognized it. But the content made our stomachs tighten. Reports of soldiers stationed here disappearing without explanation. Mentions of something inside the bunker responding to sound. Notes describing footsteps when no one walked, whispers when no one spoke, and shapes moving in corridors just beyond sight. One page stood out more than the rest. It described an incident where a soldier claimed he had seen someone standing behind him in a mirror but found no one there when he turned. The report's conclusion said the bunker held residual human impressions capable of mimicking presence. Residual impressions. Not spirits. Not ghosts. Something that wasn't alive but wasn't entirely gone. The lights dimmed again while we scanned the pages. Not a full blackout, just enough to remind us we weren't alone. From the hallway outside, footsteps echoed. Slow. Bare. Familiar. They stopped right at the threshold. We froze, waiting for something to enter the room. But nothing crossed the doorway. Instead, another sheet of paper drifted into view, sliding across the floor as though pushed by a hand we couldn't see. It came to rest inches from Lopez's boot. He picked it up. The message was written in the same shaky handwriting as before. You're not listening. Soto muttered that whatever was here didn't want us touching the files. Or maybe it wanted us to understand them differently. We backed away from the crate, and the moment we did, the overhead lights surged to full brightness, brighter than anything we'd seen since stepping inside the bunker. So bright the metal walls gleamed. Then every crate lid in the room slammed shut at the same time. The sound thundered through the bunker and shook dust loose from the ceiling. Chan nearly fired in reflex. Lopez held up a hand, breathing hard, trying to regain control of the moment. We waited for another sound. Another signal. Another movement. But nothing followed. The bunker fell silent again. A silence so deep it pressed against our ears like weight. Lopez whispered that we needed to reach the command center deeper inside. If answers existed, they'd be there. But as we stepped back into a hallway, the prints that had guided us were gone, wiped clean as if someone had swept the floor moments before. The bunker no longer wanted us to follow. And that meant it wanted something else. The farther we moved down the main tunnel, the colder the air became. Not the kind of cold that comes from temperature. This felt like a warning, the kind of chill that touches your spine first before your skin. None of us spoke. The bunker's silence kept tightening, like the walls wanted to listen to every breath we took. Ahead of us, the corridor turned left, where the old command center was supposed to be. The map showed it as a large room with reinforced doors. But when we reached the turn, we saw something that stopped all four of us at once. The command center door stood wide open, even though it was built to stay locked unless manually released. The lock mechanism hung loose, as if someone had torn it from the inside. But it wasn't the door that froze us. It was the faint sound drifting out from the room. Typing. Soft. Slow. Rhythmic. Like fingers moving over keys on an old metal keyboard. We exchanged looks. No one wanted to be the first to step inside. Lopez nodded at me, and I forced myself forward. The moment I crossed the threshold, the typing stopped, as if the room sensed us. Inside, dust covered everything except one desk, its surface wiped clean. An old military terminal sat on it, screen cracked but glowing faintly with green light. The letters on the screen blinked slowly. "Are you listening now?" The message pulsed in the center of the broken screen. Chan whispered that it had to be a malfunction, but even he didn't sound convinced. He pointed out the keyboard. A fine layer of dust covered it. No fingerprints. No smudges. No sign of use. Yet something had typed that message. We stepped closer. More words appeared, slower this time, like the keys were being pressed by a hesitant hand. "Don't follow the path they left." Lopez whispered for the terminal to be checked, but before Chan could touch it, the lights flickered violently. The screen went black for a second, then flashed with a new message. "They are still here." A heavy thud echoed above us. Then another. Then a long dragging sound. Not fast. Not panicked. Controlled. Moving across the ceiling toward the command center. We backed away from the desk, rifles raised toward the doorway, expecting something to appear. The lights above us buzzed, dimmed, then steadied again. The dragging stopped directly above the center of the room. And something let out a slow breath. Not human. Too long. Too hollow. Like someone exhaling after holding their breath for years. Lopez ordered us to keep moving. There was another exit at the back of the command center that led deeper underground. He said staying in the same room with whatever was above us wasn't an option. Before we could move, the terminal flickered again and showed one more message. "Don't turn around." We froze. Every instinct screamed to ignore the warning and look anyway. But something in the air changed. The silence behind us felt alive, like something stood right there, inches away, waiting for the mistake of one quick glance. No one turned. We kept our eyes forward, moving step by step toward the back hallway. The air behind us grew heavier, like someone tall leaned close, studying us. I could hear faint, crackling breaths, soft and uneven. My chest tightened. My grip shook even though I tried to steady it. When we crossed the doorway into the back hall, the presence behind us vanished. The air lightened. The pressure on our necks lifted. Only then did we turn around. The room behind us was empty. But on the dusty floor, fresh footprints had appeared. Not bare feet this time. Boots. Military boots. Ours. They led from the doorway to the center of the room, stopped where we had felt the breathing, and then turned to face the direction we had come from. As if the prints themselves belonged to someone watching our backs. Soto whispered that the bunker was copying us, learning us. Maybe it had been doing that from the moment we stepped inside. The hallway ahead narrowed into a deeper section of the bunker rarely mentioned in the files. No lights here. No signs. Just long metal walls that swallowed every sound. Our footsteps felt too loud, even though we tried to move quietly. Halfway through the tunnel, we found another message written in dust along the wall. Not like the earlier ones. This one looked rushed, uneven, like someone had written it while terrified. They know you're here. The words smudged at the end, like the writer had been pulled away mid-sentence. Lopez looked down the length of the tunnel and whispered that we weren't alone anymore, and hadn't been for a long time. As if responding to his voice, a distant echo rolled down the hall. Not footsteps. Not dragging. Something else. A soft tapping. Faster this time. Closer. We moved deeper, hoping for answers, but a cold truth settled between us. Whatever we were following was now following us. The tapping behind us grew faster, like something picking up speed in the darkness. We didn't run, but every step felt sharper, tighter, as if the bunker wanted to close around us. The deeper we went, the more the air changed. It smelled old, like wet metal and dust that hadn't been touched in decades. At the end of the tunnel, we reached a heavy steel door that wasn't on the map. It stood slightly open, just enough to show a thin line of darkness inside. Lopez pushed it wider with the barrel of his rifle, and the hinges groaned like they were waking up after sleeping too long. Inside was a large underground chamber with high walls and abandoned equipment pushed to the corners. Strange symbols were scratched into the metal floor, large circles with lines that pointed in every direction. They didn't look like anything from our military manuals. They looked older than the bunker itself. In the center of the chamber stood a table covered in dust, except for one spot, a single dog tag resting clean and untouched. Fresh. New. As if someone had placed it there moments before we arrived. Lopez reached out and turned the dog tag over. It held no name. Just one word etched in deep letters. Welcome. The moment he read it out loud, every light in the bunker shut off at once. Darkness swallowed us. Someone behind us whispered, but it wasn't any of our voices. It was too close, like a mouth right beside my ear. They finally came. My heart slammed so hard it felt like it might break my ribs. I spun around with my rifle raised, but the darkness was too thick. I couldn't even see the others. The sound of breathing filled the chamber, many breaths, all around us, circling us, studying us. A faint glow rose from the symbols on the ground, slow and pale like the floor itself was waking up. We saw each other again, standing close together in the center of the room. But we weren't alone. Dark shapes stood just outside the glow, silhouettes that didn't match human outlines. Tall. Thin. Their heads tilted in unnatural ways, like listening for something we couldn't hear. Chang whispered that we needed to move, but before we could, the shapes leaned forward in perfect unison. Their arms didn't swing. Their bodies didn't shift. They moved like shadows sliding across a wall. One of them stepped closer to the light, but the moment the glow touched it, the figure vanished, leaving only a cloud of dust where it had stood. Lopez shouted for everyone to back toward the door, but the chamber vibrated with a deep rumble. The steel door behind us slammed shut so hard the ground trembled. The symbols on the floor grew brighter, circling us in a ring of pale light that kept the shadows back but also trapped us inside. More words appeared in the dust on the table, forming slowly as if written by an invisible hand. You should not have come. The tapping sound returned, but now it echoed from beneath the floor, like something trapped under the metal was trying to knock its way out. The symbols pulsed with each tap, brighter each time, like counting down. Soto looked at the symbols and whispered what none of us wanted to say, that maybe the bunker wasn't hiding something. Maybe the bunker was keeping something inside. The tapping exploded into a violent bang beneath us. Dust fell from the ceiling. A cold draft shot up through the floor like icy breath. The shadows around us pulled back as if afraid of something rising. Another bang. Then the metal under the symbols cracked. A long, deep fracture split across the floor, and air rushed out like something breathing for the first time. The glowing symbols went dark, leaving only a soft red glow rising from the crack. A whisper drifted out, slow and hollow. "You followed the wrong footprints." The chamber shook again, harder this time. The crack widened. Something moved beneath it, something large. We could hear scraping, shifting, and a low rumble that didn't sound human. Lopez yelled for us to fire on the crack, hoping to stop whatever was coming up, but before we could raise our rifles, the lights above flashed back on. Bright. Blinding. Everything froze. The floor sealed shut. The symbols went dark. The shadows disappeared. And the chamber became completely still, like nothing had ever happened. But on the table, the dog tag had changed. Now it had a full name engraved into it. Chang's name. He stumbled backward, face pale. The letters were perfect. Fresh. Deep. Like someone had carved them just moments ago. Lopez whispered that the bunker wasn't following us anymore. It had chosen one of us. And now it was letting us know exactly who it wanted next.